Resident Evil has an interesting history being on Nintendo consoles. While Resident Evil debuted on the PS1 in 1996, it was originally planned for the Super Nintendo when it was still under the complete guidance of Tokuro Fujiwara, a legendary Capcom dev responsible for some of the greatest achievements in Capcom's early years. Let's also not forget that Resident Evil was a spiritual successor to the Japanese Famicom game Sweet Home. Capcom would release Resident Evil Gaiden on the Game Boy Color, and the then Game Boy Color port of RE1 was cancelled. Resident Evil 2 saw life on the N64 thanks to some incredible work done by the then Angel Studios, who would later become Rockstar San Diego after the acquisition by Take-Two Interactive in 2002. Most of you probably already know how at one point in time, Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil Remake, and Resident Evil 0 were all originally GameCube exclusive titles. The DualShock releases of RE2 and RE3 were also ported over to the GameCube, as well as Code Veronica X, the updated re-release of the Dreamcast title that added new features. While the Wii would also get ports of the Remake, Resident Evil 0, and RE4, the Wii would also get 2 rail shooters, but this is all it would ever receive. Nintendo console owners would have to purchase an Xbox 360 or PS3 at the time in order to get their hands on the likes of RE5 and RE6. The Nintendo 3DS would also get 2 exclusive Resident Evil games through Revelations and Mercenaries 3D, and the Wii U would only get a port of Revelations 1. It can be assumed that the poor sales of the Wii U is why only Revelations would get a Wii U port. Even Revelations 2 would get a release on the PlayStation Vita, and it's interesting to think about that considering that console also didn't sell too well here in the West. With all this in mind, we can now fast forward to the Nintendo Switch, and it just so happens that every major RE title and important spin-off except for the PlayStation Trilogy and Code Veronica are all available on the console. This even includes 4 out of the 5 RE Engine titles, although the caveats for those particular games will be explained later on. I'm going to take you through each of the Switch ports and basically break down the pros and cons of each release, as well as what I would like to see moving forward since Switch 2 is on the horizon as we are now officially near the end of the Switch 1 lifecycle. Capcom decided to release each of these RE titles systematically, essentially starting with the Origins Collection, followed by the Resident Evil Triple Pack, which contains RE4, 5, and 6, the Revelations Collection, which contains both games, and then you have the RE Engine Cloud titles. They all strangely vary in quality, especially when compared to the PC and current gen PlayStation and Xbox releases. I will say this here and now, that the PC versions are 100% the best versions of all of these games. With the exclusion of RE4 for the Wii and for VR, but that is subjective. I mean, an argument can be made for those 2 ports. And this is even before mods, we're talking about the vanilla base game here. They just perform the best on a solid PC rig, and that's just because the Switch 1 is just not that powerful. With all that out the way, yes, I will also say that the Xbox Series X and the PS4, PS5 releases do also outshine the Switch ports. However, I cannot deny that there is a certain kind of charm to the small but still very capable Nintendo Switch. Granted, if you have a Steam Deck or some kind of device where you can emulate games and play other games like the Odin, you could also play most of the original versions of these games with higher resolutions and frame rates, and that's fine. I simply just wanted to acknowledge these other options because I'm sure most of you watching will try to point this out in the comments, and I just really want to basically review the Switch versions of these games in a vacuum. And I get it. I mean, why would you ever want to buy the Switch versions if you have a Steam Deck and these other things? Well, what if these are your only options? I mean, let's just pretend that you only have a Nintendo Switch, and this is your only way to explore Resident Evil. That's the point of me making this video. I will also keep track of the various pros and cons as we go through each game. The original PS1 trilogy and Code Veronica are not available on the Switch to play, which I would think that eventually they would add RE2 because Nintendo even added the M-rated N64 Virtual Console for Switch Online, and yet somehow the RE2 64 port and Conker's Bad Fur Day, they're not on there yet, and that's something that I really hope they fix. Code Veronica is essential in getting the full story and understanding of the events leading up to RE5, but yet Code Veronica is just stuck on the PS3 and 360 and the PS4 to die. There isn't even an official PC port of Code Veronica. I will tell you that the HD version of Code Veronica is a mixed bag. So now let's actually dive into the games. So starting with the Resident Evil Origins Collection. This collection contains both the HD remasters of the Resident Evil 1 Remake and Resident Evil 0. You can buy both of these games digitally separately, but if you decide to purchase the Origins Collection through the in-store retailers, It only comes with a physical cartridge of RE0 and the download code for RE1. In my opinion, I personally feel this is a little backwards. I feel like the Resident Evil 1 remake should have been the physical cartridge itself, and that Resident Evil 0 should have been the downloaded version, since RE1 remake is really the game you should play first. Like, I would never suggest that you play 0 before 1. You should play 1 before you play 0. And there are also multitudes of reasons that I can get into that I don't feel like really covering here in the video. And in saying this, RE0 has DLC costumes, so you still have to buy those things separately. So it's like, what's the point of Resident Evil 0 being a physical game if there is still content to buy for it? Does this make sense? I hope this argument actually makes sense, because I mean, it just seems like that's what they should have done. Since there is no trophy and achievement system for the Switch, the game has all what you would want to unlock through this challenge system that is in the end game in a separate menu. Revelations and Mercenaries 3D both actually had a similar achievement menu in their respective games for the 3DS, so the 3DS didn't have supported achievements and trophies either. But it's nice that Switch owners can play along and challenge themselves to obtain all these achievements if that's what they really want to do. Now, the cool thing about these versions of the game is that all the features and unlockable content that are available in the HD remasters are present, including the likes of the added Wesker mode to RE0. So while these versions of the games are pretty serviceable, I would say that they are actually worth the price of admission and worth owning on the Switch, especially if you want to get your feet wet into the RE franchise. These are very acceptable ports. The loading times, however, are complete ass. If you own the PS4 collection of this disc, if you own the actual disc of the Origins collection and you play it on a PS5, the loading times are actually sped up. That's why if you go on speedrun.com and you look at the speedrun times, it will discern which console you're playing on the leaderboards, because the PS5 speeds these games' loading times up tremendously. And only the PC version has mods that allow you to skip the door scenes if you want to speedrun the game and try to get a really, really good time. Now, that is something that I'm hoping the Switch 2 will mitigate this to some degree, but only time will tell. When we get to June 5th, we will see for ourselves. Now, everything that you want is here and worth playing. The Resident Evil 1 remake is arguably one of the best games in the entire Resident Evil franchise, especially if you prefer the original style that made the game what it was. And so it's a really nice, reliable port. In fact, I would suggest that you just buy it anyway, regardless of the loading times, because Resident Evil 1 remake is just so good. Even the weakest machine that you could play it on, it's still worth having. Now, Resident Evil 0 is the more polarizing game. So if you hate RE0 for the reasons that make RE0 RE0, you don't have to buy it. This is also why I feel that it's weird that Resident Evil 0 is the physical cart for the retail version, because a lot of hardcore RE fans have very mixed feelings of 0. So why spend the money on the physical version when you could just buy the RE1 remake and ignore the understandably lesser title? In my opinion, if you absolutely hate RE0, do not buy this game physically. Just get the digital release of Resident Evil 1 remake and you'll be okay. And at least you can always purchase RE0 and its DLC if you really want to. Now, I personally like RE0, but I get why it has detractors. I also really want to point out that there are some reports of people buying the physical version of the game brand new off of Amazon and eBay, and that the code that comes with the retail package version for Resident Evil 1 remake to download is either expired or redeemed, so buyer beware. I had mentioned earlier that there was a game that at times feel cumbersome to play in handheld mode, and that game was Resident Evil 0. So there are times in a game where you'd want to move the AI partner with the right analog stick, and it could be a little tricky to try to like hit both the run button to move your player character and the AI partner simultaneously. And I will say that in terms of playing the Resident Evil 0 on the Switch, there were moments where I was definitely getting hit when I knew I never would mess up at all like that badly on other ports of the game, on other releases of the game. This is not an issue I really have with other versions of RE0. Granted, I did get used to playing with the Joy-Con this way, since there is a good bit of space where you could comfortably move up on the right analog stick and hold the run button simultaneously. But RE0 being a game with a lot of tight corridors and spaces, it can kind of get in the way of your enjoyment. There is a little bit of clunkiness to having to operate both Rebecca and Billy simultaneously when you're specifically using the Switch Joy-Con. Now, whenever I had the Joy-Con unattached, I felt it was a lot easier than playing in handheld mode. So yeah, you might want to just stick to taking this Joy-Cons off and setting it down, or maybe use a Pro Controller or whatever you want to do. But I just want to say that's just from my own personal experiences, and that can vary from person to person. But more or less, that's all I really need to say about this collection. Remake is totally worth buying, regardless of what platform it's on. If it's the only way for you to enjoy it, by all means, get it. But you might want to sit out on RE0 if you're not a fan of RE0. So next up is the Resident Evil Triple Pack. This collection is unfair and unfortunate because while I absolutely love RE4 and RE5, this pack does come with RE6. And I don't hate RE6 personally, but I would be hard pressed to tell people that they should play it. Granted, this Triple Pack does do something correctly that the Origins collection does not do, and that is the physical cart that the game comes with is a cart of Resident Evil 4, and it comes with 2 download codes for RE5 and RE6. Again, some reports of people purchasing this game sealed and new with faulty or redeemed codes are out there, so do be careful. You can, of course, just buy each of these games individually through the eShop. So if you want to cherry pick and just buy RE4 and RE5, you can go off, do it. Although Resident Evil 6 is very interesting because for some reason, this version of RE6 is the only known console port of the title that allows you to unlock all the really cool and extra costumes that you can get through Mercenaries mode. And this version of the game lets you wear those costumes in the main story campaign mode. The fact that the Switch has this feature is pretty amazing, actually. And I suppose Capcom just really wanted to sell copies of RE6 on the Switch, so maybe this is just how they went about it. Who knows? There's a similarity to the Switch version of DMC3, Devil May Cry 3, and it's the only console port that has the weapon select wheel and also allows you to change your style in real time in a mode called Freestyle mode. Also, a major selling point of Resident Evil 5 and RE6 is that these versions of the games are based on the PS4 re-releases, and also has all of the DLC, so you're effectively buying RE5 Gold Edition and all of the No Hope DLC stuff for RE6, including all the multiplayer like modes, and all that stuff is unlocked for you already. You don't have to pay an extra dime or cent for it, and that's pretty amazing. You're getting a really full package experience by buying these on the Switch. Not to mention that they also do have a built-in achievement system, and very seldomly do the frame rates ever drop unless you're like playing No Hope mode in RE6. That's a little bit more on the game and not really the console that you're playing it on. Plus the co-op games support local co-op, and that's always a plus. It's strange because while Resident Evil 4 is fundamentally the best game in the Triple Pack, it offers the least amount of content, but in saying that, it's still Resident Evil 4. My only complaint about this port, and if I'm being honest, is the lack of Joy-Con and gyro motion control support for Resident Evil 4 specifically. It would have been very cool if this version of RE4 had been the port to basically be the new Wii version. And I know not everyone likes motion controls and it's not really for everyone, but if you've never played RE4 on the Wii, you are honestly missing out on one of the greatest games to use any kind of motion control support. The only games that I can think of that are like tighter in terms of motion controls for the Wii are Red Steel 2 and Metroid Prime 3. Of course, this is just a nitpick, and if I had to tell you just to buy one game from the Triple Pack, I mean, RE4 is definitely it. However, I still feel that RE5 and RE6 are still worth owning, especially if you really need and want some fun multiplayer stuff to do on your Switch. Sure, Resident Evil 6 is a misstep in the franchise's legacy, but it's still an entertaining game, and it's very schlocky, B-film, movie fun, regardless, and it's much better with a friend. I'm still surprised how well these games run, even in handheld mode. And of course, I mentioned the motion controls, and one thing that I actually really like about this Triple Pack is that RE5 and RE6 both support the motion controls. In fact, all the footage you have seen so far of RE5 and RE6 is all me using the Joy-Cons to aim and shoot, and it's pretty damn good, man. It's really good. It feels like a mouse and keyboard. I really love it, and you can adjust the sensitivity, and it's great. Trust me, it's really cool. The Triple Pack is very surprising. Again, If these games aren't your style, then obviously don't buy the triple pack. These are pretty damn good ports. Like I would buy them instantly if you really want to play RE4, 5, and 6. If you never have before, this is definitely one of the ways to do it. The Revelations collections. Again, the same issue is here when it comes to buying a retail version of the game. One game is a download code and the other is a physical card. But guess what? Resident Evil Revelations 1 is a physical card, and that actually makes perfect sense. Thankfully, all the DLC and extra content ever released for these titles are here, and I mean literally everything, including the extra raid mode characters for Revelations 2 and all. And upon replaying these games for the Switch, it reminded me that I really love these games actually. They're surprisingly still fun and hold up pretty well. It also helps that the Revelation titles were made for handheld consoles, so there are natural stopping points for whenever you just want something to do, like on that public transit ride to wherever you may be going. Raid mode is still as addicting as it ever was, even back then on the 3DS. It was an amazing addicting mode, and there are tons of bonus content to unlock. In my opinion, both of these games are 100% worth it. They're fun enough, have interesting plots despite some campy weirdness, and they stand well on their own without the need to play other titles in the franchise. And also, these versions have motion controls. And again, all the footage that you're seeing me play right now on your screen is me using the Joy-Cons to do motion controls. The games do look a little dated, but they were originally made for the Nintendo 3DS and the PS Vita and the PS3. And if that's my only complaint, then well, like, who cares? You know what I mean? They run smoothly, they have great load times, and they're just really, really fun games with a lot of cool stuff to explore. And I'm telling you, be careful with raid mode because it's so addicting, man. It's just so good. And plus, you can still play raid mode with a friend. I do wish that there was online co-op for the main campaign of Revelations 2. That would be such a great game to play even in a non-local setting. The Revelation title is just both fit so nicely and snug on Nintendo Switch, and good job on these ports, Capcom, because these might be my favorite console releases of these games. Moving on to the final part of this video, the Resident Evil Engine Cloud Service games. I kind of hope that all the Resident Evil Engine games get a Switch 2 release. I am very hopeful that this will become a possibility since Street Fighter 6 is an RE Engine game after all. Cloud gaming gets a lot of slack, and rightfully so. When Resident Evil 7 was initially announced as a cloud service game for the Switch, it rubbed a lot of people off the wrong way. I wanted a portable version of RE7 that didn't force me to buy a Steam Deck. Then I bought it on sale for the Switch for $15, and I played it, and the weird thing is I kind of really love it. First and foremost, I was surprised that both RE7 and RE8 Village have motion controls that utilize the Joy-Cons in a way that brings a pretty unique experience that you can't get anywhere else, maybe except through VR. The controls work pretty flawlessly, and while there is a lack of visual fidelity in these cloud versions, the lower resolution kind of gives these games a unique atmosphere. It almost feels like a demake, if that makes sense, especially for Resident Evil 7, where it strangely complements the VHS aesthetic that game has, as well as like the whole found footage element of Resident Evil 7 altogether. The good news is that RE7 for the cloud is the gold edition, so it comes with every piece of DLC released in the cloud service package. That's a really good thing. Unfortunately, Village forces you to purchase the Winter's expansion DLC, and that does kind of suck a little bit. However, I bought all the cloud versions while they were on sale, and at the time when Nintendo was still allowing the gold coin system, I had built enough gold coins to purchase the DLC. So for me, it was worth it, but unfortunately, you cannot do that anymore. I even had enough left over to buy Devil May Cry 1 and Devil May Cry 3 for my Switch, so I made off pretty well buying all the digital cloud versions, thanks to the now defunct gold coin system that we cannot use anymore. Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 remakes also come with all the paid DLC and shop expansions to these packages, and I have to compliment Capcom here for not being too greedy, although that's not saying much. RE2 and RE3 remakes do not support gyro motion controls, which is a little disappointing for me personally. Being cloud service titles, how these games operate are based entirely on your internet connection quality, So if you have poor connection, you can at the very least download the demo and try it for yourself to see if it will operate well enough on your internet. The cool thing about these versions is that you are effectively streaming them, so they take up very little space on the Switch hard drive. They're probably like 400 megabytes each. If that, I think they're like 600, closer to 600, but still that's not a lot of space at all. However, there are some caveats. I have a pretty solid internet connection, and at times I did experience some lag here and there, as well as a drop in fidelity. I even ran into some loading issues that forced me to reload the entire game just to get past a certain cutscene, which I will tell you exactly the moment where it was. It was in Resident Evil 3 Remake, where the game transitions from when you play as Jill and you hit the black screen and you enter the police station, and it's kind of like the part 2 of the game, more or less. For some reason, the game froze for me there, and I had to literally quit out, restart my Switch, and boot it up again just for it to work. Now, this only had happened once, but still, once is enough time to make this disclaimer. I do want to point out that I did get to play these games at work and in handheld mode using just my job's Wi-Fi, and wouldn't you know it, that they worked pretty damn well. Now again, there were times where I'd be playing and I would get that moment where there's lag and I would have to like pause the game for it to kind of catch up and unpause it, but I wouldn't say that really necessarily ruined the experience for me personally, but that could be something that would probably bother most of you. However, I will say that I have a pretty low tolerance for things interrupting. Perhaps it just has to deal with just me and my brain. Like, I don't know about y'all, but if I'm driving in a car and my song gets interrupted, it drives me insane. So the fact that I could tolerate this for Resident Evil, I think most of you will be okay if that happens to you and you just have to pause the game to let it catch up. But again, I'm trying to still be as transparent as possible here. So perhaps you don't want to stay too far away from your router when you're playing in handheld mode, but I will say that I found that the games ran pretty well when I did play in handheld. And then I also, of course, I use an Ethernet cable. I stayed wired in when playing on my dock on the TV. I even played wirelessly as well on my dock, and more or less, it was the same experience. What's interesting is that I never had many issues playing on my OLED model, but I did on my Switch Lite, and which is bizarre because they have the exact same processing power. So this could have been like a fluke or just a weird day. Now, having experienced the cloud games on both my OLED and the Lite, I have to say that they both have pros and cons in terms of how the games are displayed. The OLED screen has much better color overall since there are no black pixels, and so the black looks great. Like the dark areas look amazing. However, playing like on a regular Switch version 1 or 2 or a Switch Lite, it will appear a little washed out, but there are 2 separate display settings in the game, and you can fine-tune the brightness for your own personal settings. Now, granted, this visual fidelity and these lighting issues and whatever, all this and that and the other, and I can go into the entire science of it all, but I'm not. These were actually just issues with only the RE Engine games. All the other games are going to look great no matter which Switch you play on, but just keep in mind that you're going to want to adjust your display settings and brightness. You're going to want to fine tune it regardless of what you're playing on. So if you're going to be on a regular TV monitor or play in handheld mode, just be aware that you're going to have to tune the brightness to fit your own personal preference. While playing the cloud games in handheld is fun and the controls are nice and tight on the Switch Joy-Cons, I do recommend playing them on the TV if you can help it. It just makes for a better experience anyway. But, you know, I can't deny the charm of playing the RE Engine games on a portable display because I just love handheld gaming. And the only thing that I could compare this to is either going to be the Steam Deck or the PlayStation Portal, which I have played, you know, my Steam versions on a Steam Deck, and of course Steam Deck looks great. And the Portal itself, however, I played the games on my Portal because I kind of wanted to compare the streaming element, and I would say they're about equal, but the Portal obviously has a much better screen and bells and whistles, so it's gonna look a lot better on there than it will look on the Switch. And it should go without saying that the Steam Deck puts the cloud version to sleep any day of the week. But if you just have a Switch, these are mostly okay versions of really good games. Now, do I think you should buy the cloud versions? It's hard to say. There's a real possibility that Capcom will re-release these 4 particular games and RE4 Remake on the Switch too. So you could be throwing away your money if you jump the gun. If you paid attention to what I said in the intro of this video, as well as the trend of Capcom to re-release RE titles on every console in existence to man, then signs point most likely to yes, that we will get Switch 2 versions, and you should perhaps maybe hold off on buying the Switch 1 cloud service versions. We do not know what Capcom will do in the future. All we can do is just kind of wait and see and hope for the best. But if Street Fighter 6 is a Switch 2 launch title and it runs as well as it does, I just don't see why they wouldn't release their remaining Resident Evil engine titles on the Switch. And I'm not just talking about Resident Evil games, but even Devil May Cry 5, Monster Hunter, and the new Onimusha. Now, if you buy the cloud versions now, you could be making a huge mistake. I had only bought them like less than a year ago when I decided that I was going to go all in and make this video. I'm a Resident Evil super fan. This is my favorite franchise. I'm obsessed with these games, and I treat my expertise and knowledge of them all as a personal hobby. And if you don't fit that bill, do not buy these versions. You could always play them on much better and more powerful consoles and platforms. However, do I like these versions? Yeah, actually, I do. Do I recommend them? Only if you have the disposable income. So the overall conclusion is, are Resident Evil games good on the Switch? I would say mostly yes. However, keep in mind that they all vary in quality, and I would probably never buy the cloud versions of these games if I were you anytime soon, because as I said, Capcom is probably going to re-release them anyway for the Switch too. That's all there is for you to know about Resident Evil on the Switch. I hope this video has been helpful for those who are simply curious or just for entertainment purposes. I appreciate your time spent here with me, and I hope you find a reason to get out of bed tomorrow morning. Thanks for watching.
Select your hero.